My sister used a sledgehammer to destroy my 17-year-old son's $25,000 restored 1965 Ford Mustang after he refused to let her kid drive it. When my dad demanded compensation, she laughed and said, "It's just an old car, he'll survive." What my dad did next, a steel crowbar in hand, wiped the smile off her face and left the entire family frozen. Glass popped under my work flats before I made it 2 steps past the garage door. The Mustang was still in the bay where Landon had parked it that morning, but the windshield was gone, not cracked. Gone, pieces of it were scattered across the concrete floor in a spray pattern I had seen 100 times in my career, always on someone else's property, always in someone else's claim file. The hood had 3 deep craters where something heavy and blunt had come down hard, over and over, each impact buckling the metal inward until the factory blue paint had split open to bare steel. The driver's side mirror hung from one wire. The rear quarter panel Landon had spent 2 weekends sanding by hand was folded in like a crushed soda can. Harold's sledgehammer was on the floor next to the rear tire. I recognized it by the electrical tape on the handle. My father had wrapped that tape 11 years ago. I stood there for a long time. Not because I did not know what had happened, because my body would not move past the windshield glass and the tape and the caved hood and the smell of leaked coolant on warm concrete. I had spent 11 years as a licensed property claims adjuster. I had walked through fire-gutted homes and hail-stripped roofing and flooded basements, and I had never once lost my composure at a scene. But this was not a scene. This was 3 years of my son's life crumpled under his aunt's hands, and the sledgehammer that did it belonged to the man who had taught him how to hold a wrench. I almost called Whitney. I almost screamed into the phone until she heard every crack in that windshield through my voice. But then I saw the key. It was on the floor beneath the dash, half buried in glass dust. The braided leather cord was still intact. The key itself, the original 1965 Ford ignition key, was scratched but whole. Landon had worn it around his neck for 3 years. Harold had kept it on his workshop pegboard for 22 years before that. I picked it up and I closed my hand around it, and I did not call Whitney. I called the police. Landon came home from his summer job at the hardware store 40 minutes later. He walked into the garage and stopped. He did not cry. He did not yell. He stood in the doorway with his name tag still clipped to his shirt, and he looked at the car he had rebuilt with his grandfather, panel by panel, bolt by bolt, weekend after weekend for 3 years, and his face did something I had never seen it do before. It went blank, not calm, empty, like a fuse had been pulled. He picked up the sledgehammer, he looked at the tape on the handle. He set it down outside the garage door without a word and sat on the bumper of my car in the driveway. The officer arrived 20 minutes after that. I gave my statement. I showed my adjuster license and the classic car policy binder I kept in the filing cabinet. The garage entry would go through my homeowner's carrier for the break-in. The Mustang damage was a separate classic auto claim. $25,000. The officer looked at the estimate and said the damage amount pushed it into felony territory. He noted it in the report. If you have ever watched a family protect someone who does not deserve protection, you already know where this is headed. If you are new to Family Secret Tales, welcome. You are about to find out what happens when a 65-year-old mechanic, a steel crowbar, and a 14-page insurance appraisal walk into the same room. Harold did not find out from me. He found out from Landon, who called him from the driveway while I was still on the phone with the responding officer. Harold drove 14 miles from his house to mine in 11 minutes. He did not say a word to me when he arrived. He walked straight into the garage, put both hands on the caved hood, and leaned on it like he was trying to hold something up that had already fallen. After a long time, he lifted his head and looked at the sledgehammer on the floor. "That is my tape on the handle," he said. "I know, Dad. She used my own hammer." He pressed his palms harder into the buckled metal. His thumbs were white. "Where is Landon?" Driveway, he has not said a word in an hour. Harold straightened up. He looked at the smashed windshield, the folded quarter panel, the dangling mirror. Then he looked at me. Quinn, I want you to promise me something. What? When we handle this, we handle it right. Not tonight. Not angry. Right, I nodded. I did not know yet how right he meant. That car was not just a car to him. Harold bought the 1965 Mustang Fastback in 1986, the year he turned 25. He drove it for 12 years. He proposed to my mother leaning against the passenger door in 1991. When Mom was diagnosed with MS in 1998, Harold sold the Mustang to cover the first round of treatment because the insurance company he worked for at the time denied the claim. He never talked about it. He never complained. He sold the car and paid the bill and went back to work. 25 years later, in October of 2023, Harold found the same Mustang at a barn estate sale in Hadley County. Same VIN. Same passenger side dent from a parking lot in 1993. Same ignition key slot. The shell was rusted, the engine was seized, the interior was mice and mold. He bought it for $2,800 and trailered it home. Landon was 15. Harold clipped the key off his pegboard, handed it to him on a braided leather cord, and said 5 words, "This is yours now, kid." They worked on it every Saturday and most Sundays for 3 years. Harold taught Landon how to weld quarter panels, how to match factory paint, how to rebuild a 289 V8 from a block. I bought parts when I could. Chrome trim from a swap meet in April. New upholstery from a shop in Glendale. Brake lines, headers, a correct year steering wheel. $25,000 total across 3 years. Not all at once. $500 here, $800 there, a $1,200 carburetor rebuild kit that Landon saved his hardware store paychecks for 4 months to split with Harold. That car was finished on June 14, 2026. Landon drove it out of the garage bay and parked it in the driveway and stood next to it with Harold, and neither of them said anything for a full minute. I took a photo. Landon was holding the key. Harold had his hand on the roof. The paint was so clean you could see the oak tree reflected in the hood. Whitney called the next day, not to say congratulations, to say that Tyler, her 16-year-old son, needed a car for homecoming and the Mustang would be perfect. I told her it was not available. Landon told Tyler the same thing that afternoon. Tyler called his mother. Whitney texted me 14 times between 6 and 9 that night. The last message said, "It is a family car, Quinn. You do not get to hoard it." I did not respond. I thought it was over. I was wrong. But Whitney had been building toward this for longer than I realized. 2 weeks before the destruction, at a family dinner at Harold's house, she had already planted the flag. Harold was there. Landon was there. June, Harold's shop neighbor who had known our family for 30 years, was sitting at the end of the table with a glass of iced tea. Tyler was across from Landon, sulking because Landon had told him no for the second time that week. Whitney set her fork down. She looked at me. And she said it. "Your son spends every weekend in a garage with a 60-year-old man instead of having friends his own age, Quinn. That is not a hobby. That is a cry for help. And you are too busy filling out insurance forms for strangers to notice your own kid is turning into a recluse." The table went quiet. Harold's hand stopped over his plate. June looked down at her napkin. Landon stared at the salt shaker. Whitney was not finished. Russ saw it before any of us did. That is why he stopped fighting for custody. He did not lose Landon. He gave up. June closed her eyes. Harold put his fork down slowly, the way he does when he is deciding whether to speak or leave. Landon pushed his chair back, stood, and walked out the side door without a word. He was 17 years old, and he had just been told by his aunt, in front of his grandfather and a family friend, that his own father had abandoned him on purpose because he was not worth keeping. I followed Landon out. He was sitting on the porch step, pulling at the leather cord around his neck, running the key between his fingers the way he did when he was thinking about something he could not fix. I sat next to him. He did not look at me. He said one thing. Grandpa heard all of it. That was what hurt him, not Whitney's words. The fact that Harold had been sitting at that table, with food he had cooked, in a house he had built, and had to listen to his own daughter say that the project he shared with his grandson was a symptom, that the boy he had spent 3 years teaching was a problem. I did not say anything to Whitney that night. I thought silence was enough. I thought walking away was the answer. I was wrong about that too. This was not the first time Whitney had treated our family like a resource she was entitled to drain. When Mom was in the last year of her MS, Whitney visited twice. Both times she left early because Tyler was bored. Harold paid for the home aid. Harold drove Mom to appointments. I took the overnight shifts. Whitney sent a card, one card, with a printed signature. When Mom died, Harold split the modest life insurance equally. Whitney took her $14,000 and used it as a down payment on new living room furniture. She posted the photos online the same week Mom's memorial was held. Harold saw the post. He closed the browser and went to his workshop, and I found him an hour later sitting on the stool next to the Mustang's key on the pegboard, not working, just sitting. That was the pattern. Whitney took. Harold absorbed. I cleaned up. The destruction happened on June 28th, a Saturday. I was at work. Landon was at the hardware store. Harold was home, 14 miles away. Whitney drove to my house sometime between noon and 2. She used the garage code she had memorized from Thanksgiving when Landon had punched it in while she stood behind him. The opener log showed the code entered at 12:37 p.m. My garage camera, a $20 unit mounted above the workbench, caught the bay door lifting and Whitney's silver Camry pulling into the frame. She took Harold's sledgehammer from the tool rack on the back wall, and she swung it until the car that her father and her nephew had spent 3 years building was unrecognizable. She did not call me after. She did not text. She drove home and went about her Saturday. When I called her that evening after the police report was filed and Landon was sitting on the driveway bumper staring at the garage, she picked up on the second ring. "It is just an old car, Quinn. He will survive." My hand tightened on the phone. "You broke into my garage. You destroyed $25,000 of property. The police were here." "Police?" Whitney laughed, a short, clipped sound. "You called the police over a car that belongs in a junkyard. Do you know how dramatic you sound right now?" Tyler needed transportation, and Landon treated him like a stranger. I corrected the situation. You corrected it with a sledgehammer. "Oh, stop. It is sheet metal and rust." Dad will side with me on this. He always does. He knows Tyler needed that car more than Landon needed a weekend hobby. She hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet for 10 minutes. Then I opened my notepad and wrote down every word she had said, the way I write down policyholder statements in a disputed claim. Date, time, duration, exact phrasing. I texted the written notes to Brock that night. Because that is what this was now. A claim. 3 days after the destruction, Nell Ashford knocked on my front door. Nell was 52, lived across the street from Whitney for 9 years, and had never once involved herself in our family's business. She stood on my porch with her phone in one hand and an apology on her face. "I should have come sooner," she said. "I did not think it was my place. But after what she did to your son's car, I think you need to see this." Nell's Ring doorbell camera faced the street. Whitney's driveway was visible in the frame. For 8 months, from November 2025 through June 2026, Nell's camera had recorded 14 separate pickups from Whitney's garage, trucks and vans backing into the driveway, strangers loading equipment, Whitney directing traffic, pointing at things, handing over items, accepting cash or Venmo on her phone. Nell had exported the clips directly from the Ring app with original timestamps intact. I watched the first 3 clips on Nell's phone while standing on the porch. In the second clip, dated January 4, I recognized the item being loaded into a white pickup truck. It was Harold's pneumatic lift. A 40-year-old rotary brand, cherry red, that he had used in his shop for decades. I had sat on the base of that lift as a child, while Harold worked on cars above me. Whitney was selling it to a stranger for what looked like a handshake and a few $100s. I watched all 14 clips standing on that porch. By the 8th, my hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from the speed of the math running through my head. I am trained to calculate loss. I walk into damaged properties and I see numbers before I see damage. Welding rig, $4,200. Air compressor, 40 years old and still running, $3,800. Snap-on rolling cabinet, $6,500. Specialty body hammers, panel crimpers, an English wheel Harold had rebuilt himself. A sandblasting cabinet, his vintage torque wrench set with his initials etched in the case. $38,000 in professional equipment. I knew the numbers because I had helped Harold insure that equipment 6 years ago. I had signed the appraisal myself. If you have ever discovered that someone you trusted has been stealing from your family in plain sight, you know the feeling is not anger, it is math. Your brain starts running numbers, dates, and access points. It stops being a feeling and starts being a case. That is what 11 years of claims work does to you. Welcome back to Family Secret Tales. I almost let it go. I almost told myself the car was enough, that we could rebuild without looking backward, that maybe Whitney had a reason. But Nell pressed play on clip number 13, and the frame showed Whitney carrying Harold's vintage snap-on torque wrench set, the one with his initials etched on the case, to a man in a gray sedan who did not even get out of the car. Harold drove over the next morning. He wanted his torque wrench to assess the Mustang damage. He wanted to catalog which panels could be saved. He drove to Whitney's house first, because that is where his main garage bay was, the bay he had built with his own hands. He called me 40 minutes later. His voice was flat. "The bay is empty, Quinn. There is nothing left." I drove to Whitney's house. I stood in the garage Harold had built, the garage that had cost him $52,000 in materials and labor 12 years ago, and I looked at bare walls. Pegboard with no tools. Empty brackets where the compressor had stood. Oil stains on the floor where the lift had been bolted down, the bolts sheared clean, dark circles on concrete, where something heavy had lived for a decade and was now gone. A single extension cord hung from the ceiling where the shop light used to be. The light was gone too. Harold stood in the center of his own garage and turned in a slow circle like a man visiting a house after a fire. He stopped when he saw the empty wall where his snap-on cabinet had stood. He put his hand flat on the wall, on the paint line where the cabinet had blocked the sun for 10 years, and held it there for a long time without speaking. Whitney and Russ were supposed to pay Harold back for the garage, $400 a month. They paid for 14 months, then stopped. $5,600 of $52,000. Harold never pressed it. He never filed. He never asked. Because it was family, and because having his tools there meant he had a reason to come over, to work, to be near his grandkid. Whitney knew that. She used that patience like a credit line. Brock Kessler, the attorney, was my idea. Harold did not want to involve lawyers. Harold wanted to drive to Whitney's house and take the garage apart with his bare hands. I told him we would get there. But we would get there with paperwork first. I sat across from Brock in his office with 3 folders on his desk. He looked at the appraisal, the ring footage screenshots, and Harold's original written agreement. He leaned back in his chair. "Quinn, your sister is looking at a pending felony property damage case, a theft referral, and a defaulted construction debt. Combined exposure is over $100,000. Does she know you are sitting here? She thinks it is about an old car." Brock opened the first folder. Then she's going to have a very educational summer. Brock submitted 3 packets in 4 days. First, a supplemental evidence file to the police for the pending felony property damage case, with my 14-page damage appraisal attached. Brock then sent the car to an independent classic auto appraiser who confirmed the number within $600. $25,000 documented the way I document every claim, except this time the cause of loss was his aunt. Second, a theft report for Harold's Tools. Nell's ring footage showed Whitney's face clearly in 11 of 14 clips. $38,000 in documented equipment. Nell signed a witness statement. Third, a civil suit on Harold's written repayment agreement and a recorded notice of pending claim against Whitney's property. The deadline for a mechanic's lien had died years ago, but Harold had the original agreement from 2014, signed by Whitney and Russ. We will repay Harold Vaughn the full construction cost of the garage addition at $400 per month until the balance of $52,000 is paid. $46,400 outstanding. Brock filed the suit and recorded the notice with the county the next morning. That was 3 packets. $109,400 in documented exposure. And Whitney still thought it was about an old car. But it was Tyler who broke the story open past what I expected. A week after the destruction, Tyler showed up at my house on his bicycle. He was not angry. He was not defending his mother. He sat on my porch steps and told me something that changed the shape of everything. She told me to ask Landon for the car 2 weeks before, Tyler said. She said if he said yes, great. If he said no, she said, do not worry about it. I will handle it. I stared at him. She planned it? Tyler looked at his shoes. She told me the day before. She said the car was a distraction and she was going to take care of it. I thought she meant she was going to talk to you. I did not think she meant he did not finish. He did not need to. Whitney had not lost her temper. She had waited. She had planned. She had used her own son as the opening move and Harold's own sledgehammer as the closer. Premeditated felony destruction. That detail went into Brock's supplemental filing the same afternoon. And then Nell's footage delivered the final twist. When I cross-referenced the dates of the tool sales against Whitney's divorce filings, the picture changed shape completely. Russ had filed for divorce in January 2025, but Russ refused to sign final papers until the joint visa balance, $29,000 in his name and Whitney's, was paid in full. Whitney did not have the money. She had been a dental office manager, making decent money, but not enough to clear a $29,000 credit card while paying a mortgage alone. So she sold Harold's Tools. 14 pickups over 8 months. $38,000 in equipment sold at a fraction of value. Brock's investigator matched the Facebook Marketplace listings to Whitney's Venmo deposits and the Visa payment dates. The money went from buyers to Whitney to the Visa balance within days of each sale. She did not ask Harold for help, even though he had offered twice to cover her legal costs. Whitney chose theft over asking. And the Mustang made sense now. The car was finished in June. Landon had entered it in the Hadley County Classic Car Show for July 12th. A collector had expressed interest, possibly $32,000. The car was getting attention. People were going to visit the garage. People were going to see the equipment was gone. Whitney did not destroy the car because Tyler could not drive it. She destroyed it to kill the attention before someone walked into that garage and asked where the lift went. The brutal line at dinner, the texts, Tyler's request, all of it was staging. Whitney needed the Mustang gone before the car show brought visitors to an empty garage. I sat at my kitchen table with that realization, and I did not feel angry. I felt the way I feel when a claim file clicks shut, when every line item connects, every receipt matches, every date aligns. Not satisfaction. Completion. The kind of clarity that makes the next step obvious. The night before the bebek, June came to my kitchen. She had known our family for 30 years. She had brought casseroles during the MS years and sat with Harold on his workshop stool on the nights when the grief was heavy and he did not want to go inside his own house. June sat at my table and said something I will carry with me. Your father has never asked anyone for anything, Quinn, not once in 30 years. He sold his car to pay for your mother's treatment. He built your sister a garage with his own retirement savings. He spent 3 years teaching your son that the world has people in it who will show up for him. And Whitney took a sledgehammer to all of it, not just the car, to the idea that showing up matters. She folded her hands on the table. Harold will not say this. So I will. He is not angry. He is heartbroken. And heartbroken men who build things with their hands need someone to hand them the right tool. That is your job tomorrow. Harold's summer barbecue was July 12th, the same day the car show would have been. I suggested the date. Harold agreed. Brock told Harold not to argue facts, only to state what had been filed and what documents existed. We invited everyone: Whitney, Tyler, June, Harold's brother and his wife, 2 of Harold's old shop customers who had become friends. Nell, I told Whitney it was a peace offering. I told her I wanted to move forward. I told her Landon was doing better. Whitney showed up at 1:15 in a sundress and sandals, carrying a store-bought pie. She set it on the dessert table and hugged Harold like nothing had happened. Harold accepted the hug with his arms at his sides. I almost warned her. I almost pulled Whitney aside before Harold stood up and told her what was coming. But I looked at Landon sitting on the porch rail with his hands in his lap, wearing the leather cord with the key around his neck, and I remembered that nobody warned him before she swung that sledgehammer. Harold waited until everyone had a plate. He waited until the conversation was easy and the yard felt normal. Then he turned off the grill. He set the tongs on the side table. He looked at Whitney. "Stand up," Harold said. Whitney laughed. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Stand up, Whitney," she stood. The yard went quiet. June put her plate down. Nell folded her hands in her lap. Harold's brother leaned back in his chair and did not move. Harold spoke the way he worked, slowly, precisely, every word placed where it belonged. "You took my sledgehammer from my tool rack and you destroyed a $25,000 vehicle that your nephew and I built together over 3 years. The pending felony property damage case is with the district attorney. Quinn's damage appraisal is 14 pages. An independent appraiser confirmed it. Whitney's mouth opened. Harold did not stop. You sold $38,000 of my professional equipment from the garage I built on your property. My pneumatic lift, my welding rig, my snap-on cabinets, my sandblasting unit. 14 separate sales over 8 months, every one of them on your neighbor's security camera. Every one of them documented with dates, buyers, and your face in the frame. That is theft. The theft report is filed. Whitney's eyes moved to Nell. Nell did not look away. You and Russ signed an agreement to pay me back $52,000 for the garage I built you in 2014. You paid $5,600 and stopped. That is $46,400 outstanding. My attorney filed suit on that agreement and recorded a notice of pending claim against your property yesterday. You owe me the garage, Whitney. Whitney's hands went flat on the folding table. Her jaw worked, but nothing came out. The color left her neck in patches, rising unevenly toward her ears. She reached for her water glass, missed, and knocked it over. The water ran across the table and dripped off the edge, and nobody moved to clean it. Those tools were in storage, Whitney said. Her voice had changed registers. Higher, thinner. I moved them for you. I was organizing the bay. Harold pulled his phone from his shirt pocket. He pressed play on Nell's footage. The tiny screen showed Whitney handing the cherry red pneumatic lift to a stranger in a white pickup. The audio was faint, but the image was clear. Whitney watched herself on the screen and her breathing went shallow and audible. That was a mistake. I thought someone was picking up a donation. I did not know what it was. Harold swiped to the next clip. Whitney loading the Snap-on cabinet into a van. Then the next. The sandblasting unit. Then the next. "This is about Russ," Whitney said. "He was supposed to handle the payments. This is not my fault. I was drowning, Dad, the divorce, the bills, Tyler's school fees. I did not have a choice." "You had a choice," Harold said. "I offered twice to help with the divorce costs. You said no. You said you would handle it yourself. You handled it by selling my life's work to strangers off Facebook Marketplace while I was 14 miles away teaching your nephew how to weld." Whitney's chin dropped. She tried to rally. "I was going to replace everything. I had a plan. Once the divorce was finalized and Russ paid his share, I was going to buy it all back. You cannot buy back a 40-year-old pneumatic lift from a stranger who paid you $200 for it in a driveway," Harold said. "You cannot buy back the sandblasting unit I rebuilt with my own hands. You sold things that cannot be replaced, Whitney, and you did it while smiling at me over Sunday dinner." Whitney looked at me. She was looking for rescue. She was looking for the sister who had always absorbed the cost of Whitney's choices, who had walked out of dinners instead of fighting, who had paid for Christmas when Whitney forgot, who had never once filed a report. I did not rescue her. "You said I fill out insurance forms for strangers," I said. "You were right. And I just filled one out for family. Every swing of that sledgehammer is documented, photographed, and appraised at replacement value. The form is 14 pages. Your name is on every one of them." Whitney tried one more thing. She looked at Harold's brother. "Uncle Martin, this is insane. This is a family matter. You cannot let them do this." Harold's brother looked at his plate. He picked up his napkin, folded it, set it beside his fork. He did not say a word. His wife stood, picked up both their plates, and carried them inside. "You said I count other people's receipts," I told Whitney. My voice was flat. The yard was silent except for the sound of the water dripping off the table edge. "You pushed a $25,000 car into scrap metal to cover up 8 months of stealing from your own father. You called my son a recluse. You said his own father gave up on him. You destroyed the one thing in his life that your father built with him to prove he was worth building something for." I paused. I let the silence hold. "You swung Dad's sledgehammer at 3 years of his life with his grandson. The key survived. You did not." Whitney's knees buckled. She caught herself on the table edge. Her chin dropped and her eyes went wet, and her left hand opened and closed on the tablecloth like she was trying to grab something that was not there. June watched from the end of the table with her hand over her mouth. Nell's eyes were fixed on the spilled water. One of Harold's shop friends stood up and walked to the fence line without a word. "I am done covering for you, Whitney," I said. "No more Sunday dinners where I pretend you are not taking from this family. No more sharing Dad's time so you can empty his garage behind his back. No more letting Tyler believe his grandfather's tools are in storage while you sell them to strangers. This is the last conversation you will have in this yard." Harold stood. He walked to his truck. The yard held its breath. He came back with a steel crowbar. Not a new one. The same crowbar he had used 12 years ago to frame Whitney's garage. The handle was worn smooth. The flat end had dried mortar on it from setting the foundation bolts. Harold walked past Whitney. He walked past the table, past the folding chairs, past the pie she had brought, past every person who was watching. He stopped at the garage bay he had built on Whitney's property, the bay that was empty now, the bay where his tools had lived and his lift had stood for a decade. He wedged the flat end of the crowbar under the first trim board he had nailed in place 12 years ago. The wood groaned. He let it creak, just enough for Whitney to hear what taking back would sound like. Then he pulled the crowbar free and laid it across the threshold. "I built this," Harold said. "Every board, every bolt, every hour. Brock can take it apart on paper, or you can write the check." Nobody moved. Whitney's mouth opened and no sound came out. Tyler, watching from Harold's porch, put his head in his hands. June set her iced tea on the table and folded her napkin into a square and placed it on top. Harold's brother closed his eyes. 3 weeks later, Brock called. Whitney's dental office ran a background update after she missed 2 shifts and a creditor called the practice. The pending felony property damage case showed up. They suspended her first, then terminated after a 5-day review. The practice manager said the case file was enough. She asked if she could explain. He told her no. Whitney carried her box to the parking lot and sat in her car for 20 minutes before she started the engine. Brock learned this from the practice manager's follow-up call to confirm her employment status for the civil filing. Tyler's break came differently. I showed him the ring footage at Harold's kitchen table on a Saturday morning. I did not ambush him. I told him what was on the phone before I pressed play. I told him he could walk away if he wanted. He watched 3 minutes of his mother loading Harold's pneumatic lift into a stranger's truck, then the welding rig, then the snap-on cabinet. When the 3rd clip ended, Tyler set the phone down on the table gently, the way you set down something fragile. "Can I stay here for a few days?" he asked Harold. Harold put a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "As long as you need." Russ gave written permission that night. Whitney did not fight it, because fighting would mean explaining the videos to Tyler in front of someone else. Tyler did not call Whitney for 11 days. When she finally reached him on the 12th day, he said 4 words. "I saw the videos." Whitney's last attempt came on a Wednesday evening, 19 days after the Babbitt. She drove to Harold's workshop. She parked in the driveway where the Mustang used to sit in the sun. She knocked on the workshop door. I was inside with Landon, sorting a shipment of replacement body panels that had arrived that morning. Whitney's face through the window was smaller than I remembered. Not thinner, just reduced. "I will pay for the car," she said when I opened the door. "All of it. Over time, monthly, whatever you want. If you drop the felony report and release the lien and tell Dad I am sorry. I am trying to be the bigger person here, Quinn. Meet me halfway." "The bigger person," I said. "Yes, I made a mistake. I know that. But you are destroying my life over a car and some old tools. Some old tools." I let the words sit. $38,000 in equipment Dad spent 40 years collecting. Whitney, you sold them for pennies to pay Russ's credit card. You knew exactly what they were worth, and you called them old tools. Whitney's lip trembled. "Please, I have nothing left. Tyler will not talk to me. I lost my job. The apartment costs more than I can afford. Just tell me what you want. Conditions, not remorse." A transaction dressed as an apology. I picked up a sanding block from the workbench. I turned back to the one panel of the Mustang that had survived the sledgehammer untouched, the passenger door. The door Harold had proposed to my mother against in 1991. I set the block against the clear coat and began sanding in long, even strokes. I did not look up. I did not answer. Landon picked up a socket wrench and went back to the engine bay. Whitney stood in the doorway for almost a minute. Then she left. I heard about Whitney's apartment from Brock, 680 square feet on Miller Road. No garage. The pending felony property damage case made her lease application harder. She signed a month-to-month she could not sustain. Tyler's bedroom stayed empty. He was still at Harold's, helping Landon strip wire harnesses on Saturday mornings. 3 weeks after that, on a Sunday evening, I was inside Harold's workshop pulling masking tape off a primer coat when I heard a car idle in the driveway. I looked through the side window. Whitney, engine running. Window down. She was staring at the workshop. The big bay door that had been open every Saturday of her childhood was shut. A new padlock hung from the latch. Through the side window she could see the Mustang frame on jack stands, new quarter panels leaning against the wall, Landon's work gloves on the bench. A handwritten sign on the door in Harold's block letters read, "Private shop. Family only." Whitney sat in her car for 4 minutes. She did not get out. She looked at the closed door and the padlock and the sign, and then she shifted into reverse and backed out slowly, the way you leave a place you know you are not coming back to. The financial affidavit she filed in the civil case told us the rest. 680 square feet on Miller Road. A pending court date circled in red by her public defender's assistant. The $109,400 civil suit summons pinned to the fridge. Russ had signed the divorce papers 3 weeks earlier without a word, because the visa was paid in full with Harold's stolen tools, and he had no more reason to stay connected. The $14,000 in living room furniture she had bought with Mom's life insurance money sat in a storage unit she could no longer afford. Tyler's room was still empty. The ignition key was not in her world. She did not have one. Harold's workshop was different now. The bay door was down, but the side windows were open, and warm August air moved through the space. Landon was bent over the engine bay with a torque wrench, his forearms spotted with primer. Harold stood beside him, pointing at the intake manifold, explaining something about valve clearance that I did not understand and did not need to. The braided leather cord hung from the pegboard hook where it had started 22 years ago. Below it, in Landon's handwriting on a yellow legal pad, was a new parts list: headers, brake lines, windshield, correct year mirrors, rear quarter panel. Beside the pad was a photo I had taken on June 14th, Landon holding the key, Harold with his hand on the roof, the oak tree reflected in the hood. I leaned in the doorway with 2 glasses of iced tea, and I watched them work. Harold looked up. He did not smile. He did something better. He nodded once and picked up a wrench. "We did it once," he said. Landon tightened a bolt. The key turned slowly on the cord in the breeze from the open window. They were already starting again. If you have been through something like this, if your family has ever broken what you built and expected you to say nothing, I hope this story reminded you that silence is not weakness when it comes with a 14-page appraisal and a notice of claim. Thank you for watching Family Secret Tales. The key survived, and so did they.